Onison is in town, I want to say I've already probably brought that up. I know I've talked to you about it, Tim. So we get those lines blurred sometimes as to what ends up here. But one thing that we end up doing is something called birthday day. Because we go out, we don't get to see each other on our birthdays. So we've kind of made this little tradition where we'll spend a day kind of doing the things that that person likes or wants to do. And I decided, let's go, we're in the Tri-Cities. So one drivable destination that you can spend a day doing some things is Spokane. And so we decided to go to Spokane. Now, granted, it's funny because I should have known something was going to be up because I didn't get to do all the plans I wanted to do, which is okay. They have this really nice gondola ride. We were going to go take the baby Reverend on his first gondola ride and ooh and ah, But anywho, so then on the way home, disaster strikes my life as I kill what is probably my favorite animal on this planet. And
right.
I can laugh now because, as we all know, the Reverend Tracy deflects with humor, particularly dark humor. So follow along as I describe the process in which, because this is what was funny. I actually made a video talking about this to my brother, the Bishop Chris, and a few other people, just because I was so amused by how I wound up unpacking it.
I got one of those.
Share it.
Yeah,
you got it. So for our friends that are walking into the room and kind of standing by and overhearing our conversation as we pretend that's what's happening at this point, is that so I'm driving and I see it. It's a red-tailed hawk. And now, guys, you have no reason to know this about me. I love them. It is like a level of childlike wonder when I see them. And because of where I live, they're very prominent over here. Every time we drive back and forth between here and the Portland area in Oregon to go see the kiddos, or any stretch of driving, they're around because we're kind of surrounded by all these fields. If you go on Google Maps and look at Kennewick, Pasco, and Richland, Washington, and zoom out, you will see just field and field and field. So they're everywhere here. I see them a lot. And so there's one flying, and I'm like, it's funny because it's I've got a sixth sense for them. Because I'll be driving, and I'm sure the Mr. Reverend is almost over to this point. You're oh, look, there's one hunting in the field, and oh my gosh, there's one perched upon a speed limit sign. I never see that, every time. And so driving, there's one hunting in the middle lane, which granted, I'm starting to wonder if maybe this was a stupid hawk, because that doesn't seem like the best place to hunt is in that little strip of grass between two fast-moving lanes going in opposing directions, right? You've played Frogger. You're familiar with the concept. It's difficult. So I'm driving, and I see this hawk. I've clocked it, right? Because sixth sense for these things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. It's hunting right next to my car, and it just got that mouse, and it's coming so close to my window. Pow. And what's sad is also appreciating that that's the closest I think I've ever been to a red-tailed hawk. And it was just right there. I could have reached because it kind of hit, that divide, that little sliver of a blind spot, if you can call it that, between your front windshield and your side, mirror and stuff. It almost hit my rearview mirror. And, gosh, yeah, I just saw nothing but feathers and everything go and everything. And I was just oh my gosh, horrible. And of course, I immediately start crying. And the Mr. Reverend's I could actually see him process it because, in those moments, everything does slow down. So while this hawk was barreling towards my face, I'm well, can't go to the right because there's a semi truck right there, and I have children and humans that I care about in this vehicle. So obviously can't make that decision. Sorry, Mr. Hawk. Crap. And so I'm crying and I'm processing the fact that I really couldn't have done anything about this. And the Mr. Reverend's just oh my God, do I need to take the wheel? Can we pull over? Because this is a very unforgiving stretch. There's not, you can pull the side because there's fields, literally if you had to, but it's not the easiest to do. And so just then it happens. The dark humor kicks in. And I just start going you know what? It's a very tragic story, but he had cancer of the beak cancer. So really, he didn't know. And so I saved him months of chemo and losing all of his feathers and bad breath and everything. And it's the Mr. Reverend's starting to laugh at this point. I was no, that's still too sad. You know what? He was a bad eagle. He was a pedophile eagle, a pedo eagle. And that wasn't a mouse he had. It was a baby bird. And he was taking it to an evil island, Eagle Island. because, he can't quite make it to Epstein Island. It's not the right, not the right demographic for infant birds anyway. But, and so the Mr. Reverend is just like rolling, laughing. And fortunately, the boys are both asleep in the back seat. Like they were aware of none of this the whole time, by the way. So no, I'm not telling this terrible dark story in front of my kids, just FYI. But the Mr. Reverend was just like laughing so hard. And I was like, I'm glad that I was able to move past it. But my goodness, like what a way to end a trip that didn't even exactly go as I planned, but that was supposed to be my birthday day. And but oh my God, I've kind of like gotten over it, right? Like there wasn't anything I could do about it. The whole, in a weird way, it was funny because it's like Mr. Reverend was like, man, I wish I was driving. I'm like, oh God, no, I don't even want you to have to process if you felt like you killed my favorite animal. Like in a weird way, I'm kind of glad that I did it. But I thought that was sweet that came up as an offering that he wishes he could have killed my favorite animal for me instead.
How chivalrous, yeah.
Yeah, chivalry's not dead, guys. It just has taken different forms based on your love language and maybe you accidentally killing somebody.
I would brutally murder your favorite bird just for you.
I mean, at least it was quick. It was down. Like, what was kind of nice was, like, universally speaking, like, later on I saw like 3 of them hunting in a field and it made me feel way better because you definitely never really see that very often. Probably about as often as you belt one with your car going 70 on the interstate.
Yeah, well, and hopefully they're not like crows or anything like that. The ones that will, look for revenge if they think you hurt one of them or something.
Right. Oh my gosh. And then on the drive, like I saw like another hawk like a little while later, and I decided this hawk's just Steve. Like fucking, I'll just name him Steve. Like I hate you, Steve. And this hawk swooped out. I was like, yeah, Steve was a dick, man. He kept slipping through the system. Like, so I guess I'm saying deflection with humor is good. Just make sure your audience can handle it. Because I could see that have gone very differently depending on who was around me. Like, may have been just looking at me in horror. I'm glad I'm partnered with my partner, I guess.
Well, there you go. There you go. Yeah, if you're going to brutally murder one of your favorite animals, do it with one of your favorite people, right?
Yes, do it with your ride or die in your passenger seat.
There you go. There you go. Well, look at that, everybody. Our friends are here. Welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and joining us is the bird killer, the Reverend Tracy, and we are here to start off Freedom Month.
Yes, so we wanted to go through and talk about, we really enjoyed making the direct tie-in to like mental health, and really a term I've almost come up with like after these last few months is kind of tying in our cultural wellness and how these things actually affect us as an American culture. Because, right, I wanted to say one thing we kind of came to together through this show is that real connection that if something can be applied to the individual, it can be applied and affect the whole, and vice versa, right? Because we do not live in a bubble. We live in this culture, and we have a mental health thing going on in our culture. And if we don't talk about it, we're never going to understand it. So I guess the last 2 months, I feel like really brought us around to what we want to do with this. And this is us getting away from the easier things to tie into mental health, right? It's easy to tie people to mental health, but now we're tying concepts, right? We did mothers, we did fathers, we got to off branch into steps and divorced and different things. So now we get to talk about the psychology of free speech. And the central question around today is, why is free speech psychologically difficult? So yes, I really loved that this is the question that sort of rattled for me. Like when I really started putting my teeth into this one was, it's psychologically difficult, right? When most people hear the phrase freedom of speech, they immediately think politics, the Constitution, or the First Amendment. But I am making the argument today that this is still a psychology episode, not a political one, because the Constitution answers the legal question, right? Like, what can the government do? But psychology asks a superhuman question. Why is hearing disagreement so difficult? Right? Because most of us believe in free speech when people agree with us. The real challenge comes when someone says something that makes us feel uncomfortable, angry, or defensive. And that's where psychology becomes super fascinating about this, especially with how open we are. We are very proud of free speech, right? Like, look at how it's transformed Facebook. Facebook started as something to connect people for their classes, to study together. And then it evolved into, oh, we need to like also go and include like other people. So maybe it's more sharing your life. You know, it kind of took over what the MySpace realm of the digital diary. Like, it used to have notes. People mostly shared pictures of their life and like what they were doing. And now it's kind of become a screaming ground of free speech when you think about it. Like,
Yeah.
it's everybody throwing, right? Nobody really shares their life as much anymore. They're sharing their opinions. So it is everywhere.
And I think it's good to be able to talk about this stuff. I mean, I think we in terms of having Freedom Month here, on the month of the 250th anniversary of the United States and everything, I think what our goal is this month is that we wanted to be able to dive a little deeper into these concepts, address kind of the mental health aspect of it too, as you touched upon, because when it comes to free speech, like, we're a country that proclaims we love it. Yet, if you look at stuff like the news or social media and everything like that, people don't really love it. People want their echo chamber. People want to have people continuously say, what you believe is correct, what the other people believe is bad. And that's kind of forcing people to kind of split apart when, as we've discussed multiple times, the numbers show 9 times out of 10, the average person on the street kind of agrees more often than they disagree on the big things.
Oh, yeah. Time and time again. Right. And we've even talked about, like, yeah, those people are bad. This goes into in-group, out-grouping. It's something that's very tasty to our brains. As far as cognitive biases, it's a simplicity bias, right? Like, just to look at somebody and say, you're in, you're out. But what's interesting is this isn't done by look, right? This is done like by means of already having conversations. So you've already tried to make an assessment, decided to talk to somebody, right? And I guess that's why it's like having a conversation. Have you ever noticed how quickly a conversation can change? Everything's going fine until someone says one sentence you disagree with, because we're gonna phrase this in an internal monologue way, right? Because I think it's easy to accidentally demonize the outside. I want to make it interesting by focusing on how we process things when we hear them. Okay, so you're right. Suddenly, you're not even listening anymore. You're building your rebuttal. I don't think most of us do that because we're intentionally closed-minded. I think our brains are constantly trying to decide whether something is safe or threatening. We've talked about that before. A lot of our survival came on those split-second decisions. Sometimes disagreement gets placed into the threat category before we've even considered whether the person has a point or not. That's what fascinated me while researching this episode. And just in general, talking over these last few months, these are concepts we brought up a lot, but it made me realize one of the biggest barriers to free speech isn't always outside of us. Sometimes it is inside of us. We can legally have the freedom to hear opposing ideas while psychologically struggling to tolerate them. And I think that's something that we forget. And we talked about we kind of touched around the idea of identity threat here, right? Like, when we hear something and it sounds offensive and we're immediately like, and that's not that you're closed-minded. It's just your brain doing what your brain does. It's trying to do that constant threat assess because it heard something that threatened an understanding that you have. And it's that safety mechanism. It's our natural conservatism, if I dare say it that way, that makes us resistant to just swallowing the new information. And that's not always bad. We only view it as bad when it's the opposing side, right?
Yeah, and I've noticed this in myself too. Like, I've talked on the show before about how I've made a concerted effort to kind of diversify the news that I get. What do I mean by diversify? Just listening to more opposing voices and not the echo chamber. But, listening to those opposing voices, I do find myself kind of like bristling sometimes because it's like, I don't agree with you. I don't agree. But, it's like by doing that, I'm not taking necessarily the time to actually hear what they have to say, which doesn't mean I have to agree with them. That's not the point. It's about hearing the opposing side, the opposing side's 2 cents in order to get a more well-rounded opinion. And it's tough. It is tough.
Exactly, but you have to think about it. If I dare help reframe in the right way, it's like building a muscle, though. It's good to feel that bristle, right? The first time Arnold Schwarzenegger ever picked up a weight, it wasn't pumped you up, right? Like he probably struggled sometimes. It's the same thing. You're building a muscle. It's just psychologically, right? Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent decades studying how people make decisions, by the way, like around this stuff. And their work showed that our brains rely on mental shortcuts called heuristics to quickly interpret the world around us. And those shortcuts are incredibly useful, but they also create predictable blind spots, right? By what we just talked about. One of the strongest is confirmation bias, a good old friend. And I feel like most of us have heard this term at least once, but that's our tendency to notice evidence that supports what we already believe while overlooking evidence that challenges us. And confirmation bias is one of the most consistently demonstrated findings in cognitive psychology because it affects virtually everybody. And maybe free speech is psychologically difficult because our brains weren't built to enjoy disagreement, right? They were built to create a stable picture of the world with as little mental effort as possible. And this is the point to your echo chamber there, because it is going to be harder for you to hear conflicting information and even take it as realistically possibly being fact if you have doubled and tripled down on one message on your brain. Because what you've done is you've essentially, like, how do you learn something? Right? You repeat it over and over. Our brains are not completely unlike a computer. And what you put in it is like the software. That was like one of my favorite things reading once in like all of my mental health journey. I wish I could remember where it was. But you have to be selective on that software. And that software includes when you're accidentally just reinforcing a message because that's what you happen to believe, and you're not preparing yourself for the fact that there are other people, other theories, right? Because not everything is as cut and dry as right and wrong. Because as we talk about free speech in general, we're talking about anything under the sun you can talk about. There are things that can be proven and things that cannot. So I guess that leads me to a direct question for you, Tim. Have you ever realized, like halfway through someone's sentence, probably mine at some point, that you weren't really listening anymore and that you were just waiting for your turn to respond?
You took my joke. Of course I have. Of course I have. At the moment, being that it is 7:29 in the morning as we record this, do I have a specific example? I do not, but I think everybody has been in this particular situation. I mean, whether it be something about like pop culture or something like that. Like I could see me doing this when somebody's talking about like something like pro wrestling related, and I'm like, ooh, I know the answer. Yeah, and you're not even hearing what the other person has to say, but you just want to go in with your monologue at that point. But you could do that with politics as well, whether it be having a conversation with a like-minded person, or, especially with someone who may not, it could be, having a conversation about abortion with somebody who feels it should be illegal. And like in your head, you're just not even listening to what the person says. You want to come back with your rejoinder, and go from there. But I think this is something everybody has experienced at some point.
Right, exactly. Like, look at, okay, and this almost goes back into social media kind of using our cultural wellness and psychology for their advantage. And this is a funnier one of it, but look at the gotcha reels out there, right? The reels they will say something extremely aggravating, very culturally, like, most people would react to it one way or the other, either strongly agree or disagree. And then you find out if you actually watched it or read it, it is parody. They don't actually agree with the thing, but they kind of almost, I feel, take advantage of this whole cognitive bias thing, right? And that can go many different directions, right? That's how rage bait works, basically, right? They're kind of taking advantage of somebody's going to either attack it or defend it. right? So it gets them views and things, and that's going to mess with us on a level, whether we like it or not. Also, look at the other funny way that it can play out. Look at that book that got released about Donald Trump, like being like proof that he was sent by God. And apparently, from what I understand, this is real. So if it comes out that it's not, I haven't gone to find it. I've heard about it, and I did a brief, like, did that really happen? Like, search it. It appears like it did, that somebody released a book, biblical proof that Trump was sent here to save America. And where this came into play, I feel the confirmation bias, right? They saw the cover. They said yes. They ordered it. Thousands of copies or whatever sold, right? To get the book. And it's all blank pages. Meanwhile, they probably could have saved a moment. And I don't know for sure if they made like a fake page making it look like they were super real. But like, did the author even bother to cover up who they were? Did they ever look that far? Or did they just read a thing that they went, hell yeah, and they ordered it and then got it, and then, oh my God, the joke is there is none, right?
Yeah.
Because that was the whole point, was they just, and right, and what's funny is they would have gotten attention either way at first, probably, until people realized it was a joke. Because how many people would have been super upset that that's the book that was being released by somebody, especially because there is a growing demographic of the religious groups that are like, no, not him, right? Like there's loud people still that are like, God sent. But there also is a very large demographic of people who are Christians that are like, no, that's not what Jesus stands for. You know what I mean? Or at least, at the very least, are hesitant to say that the Bible is declaring Donald Trump as anything special, right? Like, at least hesitant to say that, right? Even if they're not against him as president.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm glad to hear that that book was a joke, but I'm sure there's somebody out there somewhere who has put pen to paper, proving that. Because the beautiful thing about those things you call the scriptures is that you can read a lot of stuff into it.
Yes, exactly. So, going into the comment I made about our brain wasn't designed to love disagreement, right? And we got that cognitive bias, we just laid it out, that kind of puts a foundation. But the more I've looked into this, just in my understanding over my life, the more I've realized disagreement isn't always experienced as information, right? It goes to, sometimes it's experienced as that physical threat, that identity bias level, that this is information that you feel you know to a point that's attached to your identity, right? That when somebody presents information, fact or not, a fact, an opinion, whatever it is they give you, our brain takes that as you're trying to punch me. And once I understood that in my life, a lot of modern conversations started making a lot more sense to me, because this is something that's interested me for a while. And this is something that I bring up, and a lot of times feel that immediate mental shutdown. They're already building the argument against me feeling. When I bring up, yeah, this is why, if you are a person out there that goes, how can anybody still support the current president? Because I am kind of assuming a lot of our demographic would fall on that side of it based on the topics we cover. But if you're still wondering that, this is why. This very reason is why. It's because part of their identity is tied to either the person or the political party, to a point that those facts being presented are immediate threat, as if you are trying to punch them in the face, as if you're pulling out, a weapon, however you want to put that. Our brain is kind of dumb in that sense, that it does not separate somebody sharing information verbally from somebody telling you there is imminent danger coming to you.
I remember listening to this podcast from a guy by the name of Joe Walsh. I think I've mentioned that on this program before, and I think I mentioned bringing up this particular topic before. But he was going into a conversation about why he supported school vouchers on his program. For a point of reference, Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman, in 2016, quickly came out against Trump, and then his career was pretty much over at that particular point. And now, at the end of the day, like, what I respect about him is that he was kind of open about how his actions as a politician and a former conservative radio host kind of helped stoke the fires of where we're at today. So basically, he, since he did come out against Trump. He's been trying to like do penance, for lack of a better phrase, to kind of, make inroads to make up for some of the damage he put out there. But, again, he was going on a conversation about school vouchers, and I was going to say vultures, but, I didn't want to say birds today. But
I'm triggered, Tim. I'm triggered.
Yeah. But he was talking about it, and like initially when I was listening to it, like I was started just cringing. I noticed like physically it was just like, ugh, like that. But ultimately, I took a breath and listened to him and listened to his point. And I think the beautiful thing that happened was I didn't ultimately end up agreeing with him. However, I do feel that I was able to understand why someone would support school vouchers more so than I did before. And I think I really appreciated that experience.
Yeah, and that goes back to like there's kind of levels of practice there, right? Like practicing hearing opposing information, practicing not just lapping up and changing your opinion immediately, but then also when you do have the ability to change your mind about something, do it when it makes sense. But yeah, because I think most of us imagine ourselves as rational people, right? So take away what the opinion is about. It can be about pro Trump, not Trump, pineapple on pizza, not pineapple on pizza, right? Like the decisions we make, we feel we've made like for ourselves, right? Like and for not for nothing, right? I mean, pineapple on pizza obviously super silly. The more serious decisions, though, we feel like we've made them as rational-minded people. And I guess that's probably what gets attacked, no matter what that belief is when people present something opposing. That's what you feel like ultimately might be getting shaken up, right? We picture someone presenting evidence, like as rational people. We think about it, and then we decide whether we agree, right? We honestly think that's how we work. But psychology suggests that's not as clean as we want it to be, right? Sometimes someone challenges one of our deeply held beliefs, and before we've consciously evaluated what they've even said, we've already become defensive, right? Like you said it, that right there. What's uncomfortable is realizing the other person is probably experiencing the exact same thing at some point, though, especially when you start going back and forth. Like, we often think we're defending facts while they're being emotional. They're probably thinking the same thing about us. That's one reason difficult conversations become so frustrating. Both people believe they're being objective, while their brains are quietly trying to protect something much more personal. And this goes back to if you're in an echo chamber, you probably really feel that your facts are the right facts, right? And if you do hear anything that you haven't heard before because you only listen to the echo chamber, or you've only heard through the lens of the echo chamber, right? Because how are you getting the opposing side's opinion if you're never listening to the quote unquote opposing side? It's going through the filter of your echo chamber. So you're actually not technically forming those opinions yourself if you're honest with yourself about it.
Yeah, I mean, the echo chamber, we got to realize what it is. I mean, if you are a person of the progressive mindset and you spend all of your time watching like television news like MS Now or something like that, they they don't come out and say it, but it is the fact. The voices that they amplify from the other side are usually the voices of the most extreme. They are not going to take an opposing voice who people would 75% agree with and then, 25% not agree with. They're going to take the voices like your Ted Cruz's, like your Marjorie Taylor Greene's, and put them out there and be like, the other side is all just like this. And, again, I use the progressive example there. You can go to Fox News and watch the same damn thing there. They take the most, outrageous, quote unquote, progressive voice and say that is what all progressives believe, when no, that's not the case. People are all different, and you have to challenge yourself. That's why it is important to challenge yourself when it comes to, especially to getting important information like political stuff, because the echo chambers are not your friend. They're not helping you. They're not helping you get a balanced view of things. They want you to keep coming back, and they want you to be afraid of the other side too.
anything, I almost argue that a lot of these spaces are becoming our enemy because they want your clicks, they want the money. We went into this when we talked about social media and how it's not actually free, right? Um, because they're more interested in upsetting you to elicit an emotion from you. And if we've learned anything about our brains, it's when it's constantly feeling threatened and constantly feeling stressed out, it affects our mental health in a very negative way. So, unfortunately, the way that our news media market works is the more aggressive and more upsetting a headline can be, the more likely it is to be clicked. So, yeah, I really don't like that that's where we're at with it. That's why it's like I try to really seek out calm spaces that don't do that. I do like NPR for that reason. They don't try to do the headline stuff. Not that I've noticed anyway, but I keep my world pretty small in what I listen to there. Very intentional. Because, yeah, confirmation bias doesn't work alone, right? It often works alongside something psychologists call identity protective cognition. If this is not another word for identity threat, I don't know what is, right? But this is research by Dan Kahan, I think is how you say his last name, that suggests people frequently evaluate information in ways that protect the groups they identify with. Right. And that's because our beliefs aren't always just ideas. They often become part of our identity. We stop asking, is this true? And start asking, if this is true, what does it mean about me? Once that happens, disagreement no longer feels like exchanging information. It starts feeling like protecting who we are. And understanding that helps explain why intelligent, well-meaning people can look at the same evidence and honestly come away with completely different conclusions, right? This all goes back to, if you're raised in a home where a certain news channel is what was there, that's going to form a lot of your beliefs. I was talking to one of my besties recently, and I was like, one of my humble opinions is I think the reason that we get this identity protective thing, that we get so threatened, is because a lot of our identity and beliefs, probably when you think about it, are more results of influences in your environment than things that we actually chose to believe. And I think when people present evidence on something that maybe you've never truly questioned, that doubles down on that. I need to defend this nature because this needs to be right. Right? Because I believed it my whole life. This needs to be right because my whole life I've believed this. Right? So, do you think most people are actually defending facts, or are they defending identities and communities connected to those facts? Because think about it, even without politics, think about church. Think about any group you leave because you've changed your mind about it. Right? Like, wouldn't you agree that that would be kind of a hard thing to give up?
Very much so. I've talked about how I've been religious in the past myself. Never again, thankfully. But I do think most people are defending their ideas and communities more than they are facts. That is just the case. I've certainly been guilty of it in the past too. If we want to go back to the political angle of talking openly about stuff I believe in, but if I am honest about now about how I was back then, I was spouting points that I heard on the news, that I read in the news. I wasn't necessarily coming with information that I studied myself. This is why I think it is important, to really watch what you say when it comes to certain things as well, because yeah, a lot of times people will believe in a lot of things, but if you really question them about that belief, it's just they've come to it just because it's that's what everybody else does, in their community or whatever.
Right. And we've talked about that, right, though, right? Like, it makes sense that you believe the things of the people around you. We have identity narrative coming into play. There's also that we are pack animals. So we do have a vested interest and not losing our pack feeling. And when you're pack feeling, because if your mind changes about something, you might get yeeted from your pack, to talk like some of the younger kids do. You might be feeling that pressure, right? Like I said, this needs to be right. It needs to be, because otherwise, what does my world look like? What do my friend groups look like? And I think if we can kind of understand that, and that's why I say the biggest problem I have right now when we're identifying politically is not embracing them to join the other tribe, right? We're like, well, they should have changed their mind earlier. Well, they should have always known. But that's kind of not how people grow and change their minds, though. That's also not how you win wars, right? Typically, if you've got a defector, you might want them on your side after all if they're willingly wanting to come over, right? So there's also that element of it too. If you want to look at it as that purely selfish way, we should be more embracing to accepting people into our tribes when they are willing to hear information and leave the others, because otherwise it makes it even harder to be willing to accept information, because it's like, well, I'll definitely get kicked out of here if I change my mind now. And I don't even know if I can kick it with these guys, because a lot of them are screaming that my head should still be up on a stake because I ever believed it. Even though when we go into how grooming works, and if you've had certain news channels all along your childhood, how that can be hard to break, almost to a cult level.
And wasn't it Mark Maron recently in one of his latest comedy specials who said that the Democratic Party annoyed people into fascism? It's like, I that's what I don't like. If we're going into the political realm, we're at a spot, in my opinion, to where I think we need all hands on deck to be able to kind of put a stop to some of the shenanigans, putting it lightly, to some of the things that are currently happening in Washington. And yet you have a bunch of people that are just, again, social media megaphone being what it is. They voted for that. This is what they wanted. They're all evil. I don't care if they're doing this, blah, blah, blah. And that frustrates me so much, because it's especially in a time like this, with understanding the echo chamber being what it is, and also too understanding the fact that a lot of people politically aren't watching the news 24/7. They're not, reading, stuff on newspapers or anything like that. They are coming to their political opinion pretty much the day before they vote. And so, it's like, yeah, people should be ultimately responsible for the votes they cast if something really bad happens, I guess. But they can also be like, whoa, that's not how I thought it would work out. Now I'm going to go over here now to make sure this, gets put to a stop.
Because if we all really identify as being rational people, we need to understand that it actually serves better to have a message of being willing to embrace people of coming over to our opinion than making them choose, right? We just talked about why that's already hard on those levels of we're social animals, we need our groups. And that's not even getting into the fact, so that already makes it hard, right? Those are mechanisms that make it hard to change your mind, depending on how long and how hard you identify with something. But that's not even getting into the fact that our brain is more wired towards consistency. And we want to protect the consistent knowledge, right? So sometimes changing our minds feels far more psychologically expensive than simply staying wrong. Not just for losing your tribe, but for that drive for us to find consistency. Because think about how often you've heard somebody say, well, you've changed your opinion. And it almost feels like that's an insult, right? But if we're learning, shouldn't we be expecting our opinions to change occasionally? I think we've accidentally created a culture where certainty gets rewarded more than curiosity. And it's almost as if changing your mind means you lost, that you're somehow fallible, which, I mean, we are. But the irony is that science doesn't work that way at all. Scientists change their mind all the time when better evidence appears. Doctors update treatments. Engineers redesign products. Learning almost always requires changing your mind about something. So why does it feel so difficult when it's our turn, right? We're rational people. A lot of us really think that we are logical. So why is it that we think that we are supposed to have always known and always have been? And we can't seem to break from that need of this is gone way back when I have always believed this thing. Why is that so hard?
Because there are people willing to, be negative, I guess, with someone who changed their mind. I mean, if we go back into the political realm, there are politicians whose opinions would change based on how the wind is going that particular day. Also, I think back to like the 2020 Democratic primaries when they had the debates and everything, when Kamala Harris was pounding hardcore on stuff Joe Biden believed in the 70s. Like
Yeah, I
yeah.
remember that because I remember when it came down to Biden right, 'cause 2020, like whenever it came down to that, I remember people bringing up, oh, the 70s, yes. I wanted to say it had to do with potentially slavery or something like that. I don't remember, or something with the civil right. See, okay, so you're nodding, and I'm like, okay, I remember somebody, so at least I remember the topic. I was like, okay, but he doesn't vote that way anymore, so he changes his mind. And now what I know about neurology and psychology is actually extremely intelligent people change their minds. They adapt, because you have to realize culture of time also is a bit of your sophistication, of your intelligence. You have to be aware of the culture of time changes too. And as long as you're willing to change with those times, yeah, sorry guys, if somebody's changed their mind about something, that's actually a good thing. I never understood why we held this expectation for any human to never change their mind, let alone politicians. It's like, for some reason, we accept it for science, we accept it for doctors, we accept it for technology. But when it comes to politicians and day-to-day humans, it's like we're supposed to have and always been a certain way or belief.
I think another politician you can throw out there is Ronald Reagan. Why do I throw that out? AIDS. For the first 7 years of his administration, he essentially did nothing on the AIDS virus. It wasn't until a former coworker of his by the name of Rock Hudson. I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but Rock Hudson used to be basically a romantic leading man actor in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and stuff like that. Also did TV shows, but for the most part, the general public for the longest time thought he was a heterosexual. He was not, and ended up dying of AIDS. And thanks to people like Elizabeth Taylor kind of putting pressure on people she used to work with, like Nancy Reagan and Ron Reagan, the Reagans ultimately ended up turning around and putting some funding in for AIDS. Now, having said that, bringing up this example, I am fully aware that, the Reagan administration being silent for as long as they did helped make the problem far worse than it needed to be. I am not trying to say he is a hero. However, he ultimately did change his mind and did start some help at some point, and I think that is to be acknowledged. Again, let's not throw the man a parade. He does not deserve it. However, he did change his mind.
Yes, it goes back to, we brought it up recently, one of my favorite little analogies of wisdom here. The important thing is, when you realize you're on the wrong train, get off at the first stop you can. Don't stay on and see how many stops so you can keep going. Just get off and then assess and then get on the right train. Right? And it kind of goes into like why we get those feelings, right? And I think that's what we're judging, is that we still get those feelings when we're presented with information and we don't change our mind. So why did they change their mind? And right, so that goes into understanding a theory come up by Leon Festinger of cognitive dissonance. And that may sound familiar because I feel like it really comes close to some of the other cognitive biases that we talked about. The cognitive dissonance is that mental discomfort that we experience when new information conflicts with something we already believe. And human beings have a natural tendency to reduce discomfort, like any discomfort, right? And so even mental discomfort. And sometimes that's going to manifest by changing our minds. But more often than not, we end up dismissing the evidence, question the source, or convince ourselves that new information somehow does not apply to what we know. That's a normal psychological process, not a moral failure. The challenge is recognizing when our discomfort is protecting us from bad information and when it's preventing us from learning something important. And instead of throwing a question to Tim, because I think he already gave like a really great example of Reagan there with, you're right, like eventually the right information was presented in the right way. that was able to influence a change of mind. And I don't think that happened because she sat across from him and said, pitchforks out because you were against this and how dare you not change fast enough. I just don't think that's what ultimately had that happen. So there's like a big life example. And I think you sitting right there listening to us where you're listening to us, if you think about it, you could probably think of the last time you changed your mind about something significant and how honestly good that maybe felt. Right. And the thing is because we've learned that we are more likely to accept changes when that payout is consistent. But if we're not looking for ways to rationally change our mind, because you got to be careful, you can't change your mind like every time you're presented with something, but you do have to have that practice to feel that payout. Right. And so, like, if you're not practicing hearing different information to even give yourself the opportunity to change your mind, and if it makes you feel better, practice it with like hardcore logic stuff. Learn chess, learn a game. You can actually practice learning new information that isn't so tied to your identity that can maybe help flex those muscles a little bit easier, I guess is what I'm saying. Because if you're not flexing those muscles, I think that's the biggest reason, and we probably all heard this, that your feelings start to become your facts and you don't want to question them anymore because your feelings are fact to you, right? Because our emotions are incredibly valuable, but they're not always accurate. Sometimes our feelings are pointing us towards something important, and other times they're simply telling us that something feels unfamiliar. One of the hardest psychological skills we can develop is learning when to trust our emotions and when to pause long enough to question them. So I think we've all had moments where we walked away from a conversation thinking that person attacked me. And if it's not physically walking away, you can think of an internet conversation. We've all had them. But then a day or two later, after the emotions settle down, we realize they probably weren't attacking us at all in an ideal world, right? Because we have to go back to, I think you have to get like your nervous system calmed down. And we don't really live in a culture that your nervous system gets to calm down so much. So maybe the internet example isn't the best one. This might be a better one for having a conflict like with a direct friend. You're more likely to come down from that one than say the internet, right? Because they were challenging one of our ideas. And those aren't always the same thing, right? Like viewing it as an attack versus being challenged. And that doesn't mean our emotions are wrong or should be ignored. I think we learned that with talking about our men's mental health, that male alexithymia that came up, right? Like we don't want to ignore when we feel these things. Emotions are important and they tell us a lot. They tell us something deserves attention, but they don't automatically tell us what actually happened. That's where I think sometimes we get into trouble. We can accidentally start treating uncomfortable feelings as evidence that we've been harmed, when sometimes we've simply been challenged. Growth is often uncomfortable, and if we treat every uncomfortable feeling as something to avoid, we can unintentionally stop growing. And I think what makes this worse is you're also fighting, like if somebody cares about you, they want to share information with you. They're not trying to threaten you from their perspective. And this goes back to my favorite friend, intent versus impact. Their intent is to share knowledge because they feel like they know something. Going back to caveman times. Oh, don't eat the red berries. That killed Gregory. Like Gregory ate those and pooped his brains out and died 2 days later. Don't eat those. Like it does come from an honest place. And I think we forget that because we get overwhelmed by that feeling attacked, right? Because it goes back to, especially if it is over something that you need it to be right, because it's like tied to part of your identity.
Yeah, I remember my time, like when I was religious, like especially with like Jehovah's Witnesses and everything, like they would love to go out and talk to people, but when those people would challenge them on, what you're saying is not exactly right, then the conversation would magically be cut off, and they would essentially move on to the next person. You know, yeah, when it comes to like a religious thing, it is hard for people to have their beliefs challenged because they grew up into it. Their parents grew up into it. Their grandparents grew up in it, and being told that something that their multiple generations of their family have been involved in could potentially be wrong could blow someone's mind.
Right, and that, yeah, and it still gets compounded. Because depending on if you have an entire group that also believes the same thing, and they're going to reject you, if you actually change your mind, it's fighting a lot of things that, when we think about it, kept us alive as part of surviving the hundreds and thousands of years that humans have been surviving and evolving. Right? The consistency, the being in your tribe. We don't want like that whole like lone wolf alpha male thing. I think we've talked it to death that that's kind of bullshit narrative. We are not animals or creatures that thrive alone. We die alone. Case in point, a lone wolf is normally a sick or dying wolf. That's not like a tough creature out and about. But yeah, so we tie everything back. We get emotions tied into it, and then we've got strong feelings. And this is all connected to something called a cognitive distortion. We've talked about biases a lot. I don't think we've mentioned a lot of cognitive distortion. And these terms come up a lot in cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's called emotional reasoning. And this is through the work of Aaron Beck, and later it got expanded on by David Burns. But emotional reasoning is the tendency to assume that because we feel something strongly in us, it therefore must be true. So, right, this is all tying into how a feeling can become fact. And I feel like both sides, if we're going to tie it to politics, because that is our hot topic in America land, as much as I'd love to move away from it, this is what we talk about. I think you hear it, right? Your feelings aren't facts. Like, that has come up from both sides. But that's just kind of how we're wired. We're wired to be sensitive to that kind of how we're being treated by the greater tribes. Therefore, I feel rejected, so I must have been rejected. I feel attacked, so they must have attacked me, right? We're implying their intent based on the impact it had. And sometimes those conclusions are absolutely correct, right? Like, come on, trolls. Trolls on the internet are 100% just trying to get your go and just get under your shit because it makes their day for some reason, right? And then other times our emotions are reacting to uncertainty, identity threat, or past experiences rather than what's happening in the present moment, right? Somebody caring about you in front of you, trying to share information that they feel or know is true. And that's why emotional regulation is such an important psychological skill to build that not a lot of us are. We've talked about it a lot, especially coming off of Men's Mental Health and Father's Day month, right? Like how important this is and how we're building it in our boys and how we can build it better in our kids. So for the future, but there's ways to work on it as adults too. We talked about building emotional IQ or EQ. But yeah, like building that psych skill, building those muscles, that allows us to experience our emotions without immediately letting them become our conclusions. And also while not shoving them down or shaming them, right? Because we've learned that's bad too. So have you ever had a conversation that felt terrible in the moment, but after sleeping on it, you realized you actually learned something?
Well, the example I would bring up, I've already brought it up. It was that podcast I listened to with Joe Walsh. Just like listening to it, it was cringy. But then afterwards, like the feeling I felt afterwards when I really processed what he was saying about school vouchers, it was like I learned something. It's like I understood why he felt the way he did about them. And in a way that I don't think I really did before about vouchers. And again, to be clear, I still do not agree with his opinion, but I'm really glad that I had that experience because it allowed me to understand, someone else's just point of view and in a way that I did not before. And, I'm glad I had that experience.
Yeah. And it's like, I know I've shared on the show in the past, but we've got a lot of new listeners. So I come from the South in Texas in the Bible Belt buckle. And we're just going to say I used to have myself some beliefs that I don't have no more. A lot about roles of women and marijuana, and particularly our Mexican neighbors. And so I've grown a lot. A lot of that came from moving and getting away from the constant narrative I was around, though, right? Like, and not everybody has the ability to do that. But what's great is you can build sophistication. And therefore, and I hate that this is a bad word, because you can choose to not be ignorant. And all ignorant means is that you have not learned or been exposed to something. And we've turned it into a bad word, and I wish we hadn't, because it is such an accurate description of why some people react the way they do. right? Because being ignorant of something is not necessarily chosen, but we act like it's always chosen ignorance. My ignorance was not chosen. I was steeped from birth in a culture, right? And fortunately, and as outside of the statistics that this is, I got to change a lot of my mind because I moved around a lot. Right. And so building sophistication, exposing yourself to other cultures. I actually think the Mr. Reverend shared it in the family chat because we have a group chat that had both of my bonus kids and both of us in it. And he had shared an article that a 10-minute conversation with a demographic or group that you feel cognitive dissonance towards can like undo like decades of racism. Like just 10 minutes, but we have to get past that, right? So all of that to go into what I've been wanting to say, I guess, with freedom of speech, because this is all kind of related to things we talk about, right? Because we talk about our beliefs and it shakes us in ways. And because we have this freedom of speech, I get to say, with great freedom comes great responsibility, right? Instead of power, with this freedom, it's really a lot of responsibility when we think about it, right? Because one thing I don't want this episode to accidentally communicate is that because free speech is important, every use of free speech is psychologically healthy. Because rights and responsibilities often go hand in hand, right? But just because we can say something doesn't automatically mean saying it is wise, accurate, or harmless. And you are nodding, so I want to make sure if there's any interjection before I go into my next little spiel.
Well, it's like I talked about, not everybody online needs to be the flag bearer for their cause.
Right.
It's like, I've talked about it with me before, like I believe abortion should be free and legal and all that stuff, but do I need to be the person defending it on social media? No, I do not. I am not eloquent in those terms. I would not be a persuader in those terms. I think there are far better people out there to be discussing that topic than me. And that's to your point. I understand that responsibility, and that's responsibility I don't want to put for myself too, because like if I did try to go out and say something about that, I could easily put my foot in my mouth and cause more people to, be more likely to put their fingers in their ears and go la 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 in the future and not listen.
Right. And like one of the reoccurring themes you talked about, more recently is that we don't live in a bubble, right? We influence one another constantly. We're also influenced by our culture. We're influenced by life events, right? Our words can encourage people. They can comfort people. They can inspire people. They can also manipulate people, frighten them, deceive them, or contribute to someone's anxiety, right? Like, this is where freedom of speech, I feel like, does get psychologically difficult because that doesn't mean words alone explain every mental health outcome, right? Psychology almost never works that way, but human behavior is influenced by dozens of interacting factors. Our words absolutely become part of someone else's psychological environment the second they hear them. I think that's what makes free speech like that incredible power or responsibility, because it's not simply about asking, do I have the right to say this? It's also worth asking, what am I contributing to people around me? And I think one of the biggest modern examples that illustrates this so effectively is Alex Jones and the false claims he repeatedly made about the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Right? Those statements led to years of harassment and intimidation directed at grieving families by people who believed the tragedy had been staged. The legal cases against Jones weren't about punishing unpopular opinions. They centered on defamatory false statements that caused demonstrable harm. I think that's an important distinction. Granted, this is a pretty big and directly, even physical harm example, right? Like the things that were happening to these families, because they identified so much with what Alex Jones was telling them and potentially being backed up by any other echo chambers they were listening to, that these families simply saying, no, my child really died, offended them so much, they justified a attacking them, either physically or with words psychologically, right? Because, yeah, psychology has long shown that repeated messages can influence beliefs, particularly when they're emotionally charged or repeatedly reinforced and not challenged. Research on misinformation, persuasion, and social influence consistently demonstrates that words can shape us. Like, they can shape our trust, our fear, and behavior, like all of us, right? I think that's why free speech deserves to be treated with both gratitude and responsibility as the power that it is. The freedom to speak is powerful, precisely because words have the ability to affect other human beings. So it's that tricky question, right? Like, how do we encourage people to value free speech while also encouraging them to take responsibility for the influence their words have on others?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a clear answer, like I would be a billionaire right now. It is hard.
Right.
Like people, like because in the question there, it's like two separate things going on. You know, people, everybody in this country, I think, will say they value free speech, but they don't want to hear the speech of someone they disagree with. And I think again, more and more people just need to take a breath and dive into that deep end of, you know, trying to listen to other voices about a topic that they think that they know everything on. It's about challenging yourself, and I don't think this culture is really set up to allow people to necessarily to do that. It encourages people to continue on with their beliefs, to stick with the echo chamber that they have, and everything. And it's really, really hard to break from that.
Right, because it goes back to, what do we understand our brain's reward system? We love consistency. And that goes into, yeah, those consistent messages bring a level of comfort more than hearing new facts do. And I guess all of this episode really brings us to the final question that I'm going to do my best to break down as best as I can understand it. And that is, if free speech is psychologically, like, what does psychologically healthy free speech look like? Right? Because if free speech is psychologically difficult because of the way our brains naturally work, how do we pivot that? I don't think it's by blindly agreeing, but I also don't think it's censorship. I don't think it's winning arguments. I think it's developing the psychological maturity to hear something challenging without immediately deciding the other person is an idiot or an enemy. And one thing I appreciated while looking into all of this is that psychology never asks us to stop disagreeing. In fact, disagreement is often how we make progress. It goes back to, is it not like flexing a muscle? It's just a mental one. Science advances because ideas are challenged. Relationships grow because difficult conversations happen. This is something that Mr. Reverend and I have always said, is especially early on, that we had some disagreements that almost ended our relationship, but we chose to have the difficult conversation and continue through. And I could not imagine being primarily partnered with anybody else, right? And that even goes into people who almost divorced over, I've met a couple who almost divorced over an infidelity incident, and they wound up going into therapy, and their whole thing was, for their situation, for the situation in which it happened to them, it made them much stronger in the end. So the goal is not agreement. It's learning to separate listening from agreement. Right? Because listening doesn't mean abandoning your values or pretending every opinion deserves equal weight. It simply means understanding what another person is actually saying before deciding what you think about it. I also think we've accidentally started treating changing your mind like losing. But if we're committed to learning, shouldn't we be expecting our opinions to change from time to time? And one of the smartest sentences a person can say might simply be, I hadn't thought about it that way. And what's great is, that can help them feel heard and bring them down, right? From having to keep going and going. But it's also not you saying you agree with them. And I think that's a very intelligent way to handle these when you're hearing information that you're not absorbing as fact and not willing to absorb as fact at that point, right? And then this also goes into working on your emotional regulation. Practicing changing your mind when you can use logic to learn something new, right? I think there's a lot of ways that we work on our individual selves that can make our freedom of speech more healthy for everybody. And so, psychologists have become increasingly interested in something called intellectual humility. Basically, that is the willingness to recognize that our knowledge is limited while remaining open to learning. And that's research by Elizabeth Krumare Mancuso. I am so sorry if I butchered that because some of these people are obviously from around the world. And their colleagues have linked intellectual humility with greater openness to new information, less polarized thinking, and more respectful conversations across disagreement. And does that not sound like how a rational person would operate? If we think we're rational, we should work towards intellectual humility, right? We should work towards less polarized thinking and more respectful conversations. And another concept is called active open-minded thinking. And that encourages people to actively look for evidence that could change their minds instead of only searching for evidence that confirms what they already believe. And I actually think that's one of the healthiest habits we can start developing, because maybe the goal isn't becoming someone who's never wrong. Maybe it's becoming someone who's never done learning. So I don't know. Do you think there's hope? Do you think our culture has started rewarding certainty more than curiosity, or can we start rewarding curiosity more than certainty?
I try to think positive. I think there are some signs that people are kind of tired of what the past 10, 15 years of politics, if we're talking about politics alone here, of course, I think there are some people who are kind of tired of how politics have become. And there are some signs that, there could be some changes that way, but overall, I still think we are a society, a culture that rewards certainty more than anything else, which is why you have political figures like Trump, like a Ted Cruz, like, other people of other political persuasions as well, of similar mind bents, the ones that are absolutely certain about everything they know and they are never wrong and all that stuff. I think it's just too easy for people to follow that. I would like to think that people would want change, and I hope we do see that change. But I think our culture, more than anything, does reward certainty more than anything else.
Right, which is a bummer because even on the mental health level, we know getting curious about those negative reactions does far more for healing than just shutting down and getting defensive about them, right? So I guess really it's going to have to revolve around us individually being willing to change. And hopefully and ideally that influencing our greater culture so that we are just more receptive, right? Because more of us need to be willing to come down from the emotional heightenedness, and more of us need to be willing to work on our emotional regulation. Right? Hey, hot tip, if you do find yourself bristling a lot like that in the wild and never in the stuff that you choose to listen to, you might want to consider listening to your echo chamber. What is your echo chamber like?
Because, too, I think it will allow you to see that when it comes to certain topics like say unfortunately the trans issue out there, or with immigration being what it is, it will allow you to see that maybe sometimes the other side does have a point on certain things. I know you've sent me a couple of articles in the past when it comes to the trans issues of very specific incidents where you had health officials making bad choices. And, those are anecdotal. Those don't, in my opinion, represent the entirety, I guess, of what's happening. I think 9 times out of 10, the anecdotal stories don't represent what's really going on. However, it happened. And, for stuff like those anecdotal stories, that's stuff that people should keep in mind, because, when it comes to, like a health issue like that, you don't want a health official making a rash decision that's going to cause problems down the road for somebody.
Right. And this is also, misinformation harms no matter what direction. Because to me, what you're referencing, I believe, is the child in New York who had their breasts removed. And a lot of that came from a misunderstanding on what gender affirming care means. Gender affirming care is not surgery. It can be. It is not solely. That's how I should say it. Gender affirming care is not solely hormonal intervention. It is not solely surgical intervention. It is not solely those things. And when that doctor for that case told that parent that if you don't do this gender affirming care, your child is at a statistic for suicide, that was why that case got won, by the way, because they tried to throw it on the parent. But what it came down to was the parent was given a narrative. Yes, true, when you deny gender affirming care, there are statistics to that. However, the danger is the misinformation on what gender affirming care is. Gender affirming care can be as invasive, I should say, as talk therapy through those teen years to make sure how we are feeling by the time we are an adult and making decisions like surgeries that we may want. Right? Because it goes back to, it's my unpopular opinion, I think, is if you feel like you have to surgically alter your body out of a compulsion and not a want, that might be worth looking at. Because what happened with this kid, it seems, is they were going through some dysmorphia and maybe came out of the other side of it and felt robbed because the people who are supposed to be looking out for them, I think her now is what they're going back by, they did not feel took care of them. So if there's anybody that's upset by that, that's my understanding of it. Please feel free to read. It's been a minute since I've looked into it, but yeah, like that's a real hot topic. And that is such a great example of emotions and facts and how that can like tie in to an opinion on something.
There's another one I'm thinking of too, immigration. For the longest time, I was against what, a lot of the conservative talking head types were talking about when it comes to immigration.
Right.
The one key fact I didn't take into account, though, was just how messed up our immigration system is in this country. Like, you do have, small towns in Texas that, I don't want to use the word swarmed, but, they have far more people coming in from Mexico than they can really handle. And and I hated when these governors did that, but you had the Governor Abbott from Texas and that douchebag from Florida that was sending like buses of people to like Massachusetts and other places
trying
and stuff
to
like
spread
that.
them out so other people could feel it. That was my theory as to what that was about. I think it's like, oh, well, you guys just don't feel it, so we should spread them out. That was my joking way of dealing with it in my brain.
In a way, though, I think what they did was give those communities a taste of what, the communities in Texas and Florida did have to experience, because you had these communities all of a sudden have to find, room and board for these immigrants. And it's like people wanted to help, but if you got a really small town with limited resources, there's only so much you can do, right? And if the immigration system was in a much better place, then the small towns would not have to have that level of stuff that they couldn't handle. They would be able to handle it better. And that's what I was not taking into account. And that's a more nuanced version of immigration than I like immigration. Immigration is bad. It's like, for me, I as long as a person is not like a murderer or anything like that, I don't care if they come into the country myself. I think it is reasonable to try to get some background information on them to make sure that, they're not like a criminal or something like that. But if they want to come here, great. But it also should be done in a way to where, resources of a particular town are not going to be like instantly depleted or something like that. There needs to be some major change. And I think that's something, else to think about too.
Yes, because when you think about it that way, it's kind of easy to see where it feels like an infestation. Not saying people, I'm making the analogy. There's a difference between something new in your environment feeling like an infestation versus a cohabitation. right? And that's like, so I think when those emotions get into it and we're in grouping and out grouping and we feel discomfort, that's where it's like, this feels like an infestation. Therefore, that is bad. That is the bad thing, right? And I think it's just that's the easy. But that goes to, we are so tied by our feelings. When we feel frustrated, when we feel angry, and those feelings mean something because, like we said earlier, it is just trying to tell us that we need to give something attention, right? However, it's not helpful to stay there. So it's kind of like teaching yourself that fine line of accepting that you're feeling an emotion, but also accepting that you need to move past that so that you can get out of emotion brain and into problem solving brain. Because problem solving brain, logic brain and emotion brain, different languages. Your best problem solving just isn't going to come while you're seething with anger, while you're tears because you just hit your favorite bird on the planet, right? Like, it's just, you're not going to make your best decisions when you're at any of those emotional highs, right? So the best thing you can do, breathing techniques, emotional regulation skills, bring it back down so you can be that rational human. I know all of you are. I'm pointing, we don't have visuals, but I know you are all rational humans. We are to a point. We want to be, and we can build those skills to be better at being rational.
Damn right.
Everybody's welcome here, damn it. Like, as long as you're rational and open-minded practice, like, you're welcome here.
That's right. That's right. Agreed.
But that is all I have. Did you have anything any questions, any ponderings? I know like some things don't always make my notes, so.
It was pretty in-depth, pretty well said from first to last there. I think, again, I would just challenge the people once again to take a deep breath. And when it comes to speech, whether it be political speech, whether it be pop culture speech too, because you do have a number of people that have like vehement opinions about something as simple as like Star Trek or something, it's like, be willing to hear someone else out. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you can still learn something about yourself and about them. And you, at the end of the day, you will understand, what I keep saying and what the numbers continuously prove is that we agree on far more than we disagree with. It's just, there are people that are benefiting off of us arguing. And I think we all should take note of that.
Yep, they're benefiting by getting clicks, they're benefiting by getting votes, they're benefiting by getting money, by convincing you that buying a product, right? So the faster that you can get that cognitive dissonance reaction and breathe that out of your body, you can name that emotion in your head if you want to. And maybe you can reframe by looking at the human in front of you and going, we probably agree on more than we disagree.
Yes.
And like, see if you can tap into that as a superpower and stop trying to change their mind and maybe get to a point where you can just simply say, I never thought of it that way. Because then you can even take that information home and decide how you actually want to unpack it when you've stepped away from the emotion.
Agreed. Well said. And I think a good way to wrap things up this week.
Yeah. I think it was as the baby Reverend dumps an entire tub of toys at my feet going, I heard you say it's time to wrap up. It's time to play. Yes, I want to play with you.
Well, yeah, I would be a fool to keep going at this point. So for the baby Reverend, each week we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu. I
just can't wait to be free. I don't know. I'm trying to do outros. I'm lame.
Was that the bird? Was that the bird saying that before?
Oh, he didn't even get his last meal when I thought about it.
Yeah, free thunk. No.
Thunk.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.